welcome. This is the South African Morning. Now, when we entered into lockdown, government had declared that, of course, no tenant should evict, or that no landlord should evict any tenant. But today we'll be, of course, taking the discussion even further. I am talking to Paragon Lending Solutions CEO Gary Palmer, who will be joining us, of course, this morning to discuss possible solutions for both lenders and those who are indebted at this time. Gary, good morning to you, and thank you so much for your time. I mean, it's quite understandable that, you know, during lockdown, banks came to party. Some tenants were not paying the installments at all, while some, of course, were given time just to pay half of the installment. But how critical was this decision made by banks and financiers to come to party and assist with tenants here?
Yeah, firstly, good morning. The banks really did come to the party. You know, often banks get a bit of a bad rap in terms of some of their behavior. But during COVID, if you look at the statistics, you know, banks helped more than 90% of small businesses and over 84% of individuals in the first period of lockdown with payment holidays, which is exceptional. So all credit must go to the banks for that. But we are getting to a period now where it's virtually 6 months since the beginning of lockdown, and the Reserve Bank is now starting to put a little bit of pressure on the banks in terms of how they are treating their clients in terms of provisioning. Because, you know, in the first period, we saw in the first 3 months, the banks giving payment holidays. And then the 3 months after that, banks getting a little bit tighter and saying, well, you know, at least service interest or make part payments. But we're getting to a point now where I can see an impasse now where the banks are going to start putting more and more pressure on their clients because pressure is coming from the Reserve Bank to start making provisions. So also the same with landlords and tenants. You know, the landlords have come to the party in terms of rent holidays. But now, you know, the landlords are also running their own business. So tenants need to start paying. And unfortunately, I saw a statistic this morning that 2.2 million jobs have been lost in the second quarter of this year. So there's certainly some tenants that can't pay. So there's definitely going to be a bit of a bumpy road ahead. Yeah.
And with that being said, I mean, for tenants that can't pay, for those who still can't make their installments, what is the rapport now? Will they be, you know, met with legal proceedings, legal action, or is it time for them to continue making those arrangements with their banks or even their landlords?
Yeah, it's a very good question. You know, the point is what we've seen is quite interesting is that the courts now are starting to allow for the eviction process to start. And that's in terms of sending out letters of demand, etc. But, you know, we haven't seen this before, and it's very much trial and error. But I think what the courts are looking at now in terms of eviction notices is the behavior of the landlords to their tenants. If, you know, because some landlords are going to take advantage of the situation and say, well, you know, I didn't want my tenant there in the first place, so let's use this COVID process to evict the tenant. And the courts are going to look out for that. So they are looking at behavior. And it's behavior of how did the landlords treat their tenants? Did they give their tenants a payment, a rent holiday? Have they extended in terms of letters of demand? And have they treated them well? And conversely, how have the tenants behaved towards the landlords? If the tenants believe I'm going to put my head in the sand and not do anything and not communicate, well, then definitely, you know, the courts are going to favor the eviction process. Very similar to the banks. You know, the banks are going to start looking at how did the client perform before lockdown. If the client was a performing client and a good client, they're going to be more patient. The banks are also going to start looking at the loan to values, if the banks have got property as security. And we all know, unfortunately, now the values have come down. So the clients are going to be under a little bit of pressure. So, you know, the recommendation is that tenants need to communicate with the landlords, and also borrowers need to communicate with their funders.
Well, Gary, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much for joining us. That is, of course, the Paragon Lending Solutions CEO, Gary Palmer, joining us there.